Chapter 841 Chaos 3. In most cases, the protagonist of a story would appear right at the moment when something terrible was about to occur to their loved ones or friends. And just in the nick of time he'd save them. It always ended up like that. So why? Bang. Why did that never happen to me? Bang. Why was it that I always arrived a tad bit too late? Bang. Just a fraction. If only I had arrived a couple of seconds earlier. Just a few seconds. Bang. Why couldn't you wait a few more seconds? My hand moved on its own. I just pulled it back and repeatedly smashed it against the wall of the cave. Debris and dust flew everywhere, but I didn't care and just continued to smash the demon's head against the side of the cave. In the meantime, power started to flood my body as the laws within it started to increase. I started to use that very same power that was flooding my body. I wasn't supposed to use them. Every part of my body was tearing apart at the usage of the laws, but I didn't care. It was because I kept holding back that such situations were happening and I couldn't forgive myself for it. At the same time, I couldn't forgive them. They were just as guilty as I was and they needed to die. As a result, I made the decision to stop holding back and use everything that I had, even if it meant risking my body. Everything. Thump. Only when there were no more walls did I finally stop and throw the demon to the ground. Why didn't you wait for a few more seconds? I stepped forward and lowered my head. Staring straight at the demon, my already numb mind became an even number, and whatever color was left of the world started to fade. Tell me why. Helplessness. The feeling or state of being unable to do anything to help yourself or anyone else. It was a word and an expression that Prince Solbacon had heard many times in his life. Over the course of his life he had been exposed to a number of situations in which he had seen other people give in to the sensation of helplessness, and he had become accustomed to it. To the point where he even found a peculiar sense of satisfaction in it. On many occasions, just to see that very same expression, he did everything within his power to make their lives miserable and make them beg him for forgiveness. The funny thing was, they had never done anything wrong to him. He simply delighted in seeing the various expressions on their faces and soon became addicted to receiving such reactions from his prey. Yes, their prey, as they were nothing but his prey. There was a reason why he didn't kill the human child immediately, and it was precisely so that he could see that very expression on his face. When he did get that look, in that brief moment, shivers ran down the prince's spine as he gazed at the young boy who showed such an expression. I want more. I want to see more. That one brief instance was enough to make the prince want to kill the young boy's other companion, but, indeed, bang! Out of nowhere, a dark figure materialized in front of the prince, their extended hand lashing out and grasping his face. Bang! The prince felt his head crash against something hard and he groaned in pain, disoriented. Yuck! One should indeed pay for their actions. The figure spoke, their voice cold and dull. Panic surged through the prince as he realized he was at the mercy of an unknown assailant, and he tried to resist. You fool, ok. Bang. His head was slammed against the solid rock of the cave once more, the pain searing through him. The rock was extremely dense and the force of the impact knocked the wind out of him. The prince's heart raced as he tried to struggle, but the grip on his face only tightened, and he felt a strange suction force drawing the energy from his body, draining the power that His Majesty had bestowed upon him. Impossible. The prince gasped, his mind racing with questions. How can this bastard possess such power? Did His Majesty bestow similar powers upon someone else? The prince's fear deepened as he felt the foreign energy within his body dissipating alarmingly with each successive blow. No. Bang. Another impact against the cave wall and the prince's panic intensified. He was helpless, unable to break free from the assailant's grip or prevent the loss of his powers. His head throbbed with pain and he struggled to maintain his composure. Bang! The prince's head was slammed against the wall once more, but this time the grip on his face loosened and he stumbled to the hard ground, coughing and gasping for breath. Cough. Ka. The assailant's presence loomed over him and he raised his head slowly, his gaze meeting theirs. Ha. Yeah. The prince's breathing became more labored, and he felt a sense of helplessness washing over him. It was the first time he had experienced such vulnerability, unable to do anything as someone stood above him, looking down on him with a cold, unfeeling gaze. The prince's hands moved back, his body trembling as he tried to push himself away from the figure. His mind raced with fear and uncertainty as he realized the gravity of the situation. He was defenseless, stripped of his powers, and at the mercy of his unknown assailant. The soft sound of a footstep echoed through the cave, and the figure's shadow cast over the prince. He swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the figure's cold gaze. His breathing grew shallower and his chest tightened with fear. So this is how it feels. The prince thought, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He had always been the one in control, the one with power and authority. But now he was reduced to such a sorry state by this unknown figure, unable to do anything but watch as his fate hung in the balance. Helplessness, something that he had never thought he'd feel, engulfed him, and the prince's heart clenched in fear. Why, you? Who are you? He struggled to find a way out, but his mind was foggy and his body weakened. He was at the mercy of the unknown assailant, and the reality of his vulnerability hit him hard. The figure remained silent, their cold gaze never leaving the prince. The tension in the air was palpable, and the prince's thoughts raced as he tried to devise a plan to regain control of the situation. But his mind was blank and his body felt heavy with exhaustion. Ha! Ha! The prince's breathing grew shallower and his vision blurred. He tried to summon his inner strength, to fight back against the overwhelming sense of helplessness that threatened to consume him. And it was right at that moment that he recalled something. That's right. Why didn't I think of that? Prince Solbacon muttered to himself as he recalled the true purpose of collecting those who had entered the pillar. Power. The purpose of collecting them was so that he could fuel his power. Despite the setback from what had happened moments before, he had still managed to collect enough. Thum. With a sudden burst of energy, the prince pressed his hands against the ground, and a darkish green hue began to emanate from his body. Rumble. Rumble. The surroundings trembled as rumbling echoes filled the cavern. Stalactites above them fell to the ground, shattering upon impact, and green runes spread across every surface. It wasn't just the cavern that was shaking but the entire pillar itself. The runes appeared on the trees, the rocks, the ground, and everything else that covered the entire world within the pillar. Power surged into the prince's body. It's working. Prince Solbacon grinned with delight as he felt the power flowing into his body. It was more than he had anticipated, though slightly less than he wanted. Nevertheless, it was enough to fuel his plans. His previously helpless expression morphed into one of twisted satisfaction. Yes, this is good. He murmured silently, his voice filled with what seemed to be happiness. It's a little less than I wanted, but this is enough. Yeah, this is more than enough. Power continued to flow into the prince's body, and his physical form started to change. His body inflated and his power surged dramatically. The cave, which had seemed on the verge of collapse, finally gave way as walls cracked and everything fell apart. Crack. Boom. Boom. Prince Solbacon exuded a terrifying aura as his expression twisted with newfound power. Yo. But before he could utter another word, a single command stopped him in his tracks. Stop. It was just one word, a single word, but the impact was immense. Time seemed to freeze at that moment, and the space around the prince twisted as a familiar force chained him down. This. The prince tried to struggle to break free, but his efforts were in vain. He could only watch in horror as a figure approached him from above, two eyes looking down at him with such indifference that it made him feel utterly insignificant. No. The prince muttered, realizing the gravity of the situation. He was completely at the mercy of this unknown figure. But how? How was this possible? He was someone who stood at the pinnacle. So how was it possible for him to lose this miserably? How? The sound of a single step echoed in the frozen world, and the prince's body tensed. He looked up to see the figure reaching out with a hand, which soon passed through his body, retrieving his core. The process was quick, but in the prince's eyes, it felt like an eternity. No, not like this. Alas, it was too late. Without so much as sparing him a glance, he clenched his fist and the core shattered apart. Crack. Everything turned dark after that. During the end of his life, all Prince Solbacon felt was helplessness. Chapter 842 Chaos 4. Ha ha ha. I could barely hold my breath at the moment. Something seared through my chest as what remained of the core crumbled from my hands and reached the floor beneath me. Pain engulfed my entire being as I stretched my hand, which was flickering in and out of existence. The toll that the laws had taken on this body was quite large, and each second felt more agonizing than the other. I need to go. There wasn't much time left. I could tell with just a glance that my time in this body was almost up, and that it would soon shatter. But that was fine. There were only 2 remaining Pillar Masters. Just 2 more. All I needed to do was get rid of them. So long as I did, my goal was accomplished. No, there's still one more thing left. Whew. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. Indeed, there was still something else that I needed to do after getting rid of the Pillar Masters. Something far more important and more meaningful to me. And for that, a crack formed on the space in front of me as the pillar started to shake simultaneously. Rumble. Rumble. Using all of my power, the very air inside of the pillar started to twist and the shaking grew more intense. At the same time, the crack in front of me started to expand and I turned my head. It was there that my gaze met with Ryan's. The 2 of us looked at each other for a couple of seconds before I nodded at him and mouthed, "Take care of what happens next." Where do you think you're going? I felt something grasp at my arm just as I was about to leave. When I turned my head, I found myself staring at Emma. Her eyes were burning with a certain something that forced me to stay rooted on the spot. "Tell me." Every word that came out of her mouth seemed to be a struggle for her. She had a pale complexion and appeared to be on the verge of passing out, but even as she was clinging to me, her bloodshot eyes were focused intently on me. "I know you know." She started, her voice hoarse. "Why, you've been keeping a lot of things from me, and while I never asked you because I respected you and what you've been trying to do, I can't take it anymore. I'm losing my mind and..." Emma ruffled her hair, her voice turning feeble. I need answers. I can't take it anymore." I stared at her without saying anything. I couldn't do it, and just as I was about to say something, she interrupted me with a question that stopped me in my tracks. Who is Kevin?" She ruffled her hair once more. He keeps appearing inside of my head and I just can't take it anymore. Feels like I know him. It feels like he should be someone important to me, but why can't I remember him?" Her voice was laced with desperation, and when she looked up at me, she bit her lips until they bled. "You know, don't you? Not only that, you also know what happened to my father, don't you? Why won't you tell me? Please tell me." Rumble. Rumble. In the background, the pillar continued to shake and everything around us was crumbling. Even so, despite everything that was happening, I continued to stare at Emma, and I eventually let out a sigh. Cat's out of the bag, I guess. I didn't want to do this. Not now and not in this situation. I wanted to tell her after everything was done and the situation wasn't precarious, but seeing the state in which she was, I knew that such an option didn't exist. "Stay still." When I extended my finger forward and pressed it against her brows, I could feel the strength leaving my body. But I bore through it and imparted everything that she needed to know. Done. The process didn't take too long and I didn't linger to see her reaction. Stepping into the crack beside me, my vision blurred. I hope I didn't make a mistake. Take care of what happens next? Those were the words that Ryan managed to interpret from Run before he left. His mind was still in a mess, but he was somewhat able to calm himself down. Rumble. Rumble. The pillar continued to shake and everything around him started to crumble and fall apart. Without saying anything, Ryan turned his head, and his gaze paused on 2 figures on the ground. They were Emma, who passed out shortly after Run left, and Leopold, respectively. Unlike Emma, the area around Leopold was covered in a pool of red. The blood had since stopped, but Ryan just couldn't bring himself to look at the scene for too long. Boom. The ceiling started to fall apart and the demons around them went into panic. Without saying much else, Ryan picked up Emma and then walked to where Leopold was. With each step he took, his heart grew heavier. This was the second person he had lost whom was close to him. The pain that he once thought he wouldn't experience again started to resurface, and he brought his arm to his face, wiping away at whatever was falling. Biting his lips, he moved next to Leopold and pressed his hand against his chest. Bang! Bang! A blue barrier formed around the 3 of them, and right as the shield formed, the cave's ceiling crumbled, burying the 3 of them together. The world within the pillar collapsed after that. Earth. Careful, there's still a lot of demons. We may have the upper hand, but I'm not sure for how long. Monica's face tinged with worry as she gazed at her horizon where thousands upon thousands of demons were. Alongside them were a legion of monsters that bore their fags at them. The scene would leave anyone tingling with fear, and had the scene happened in the past, then perhaps so. Unfortunately, things were different now. Everyone had witnessed the fall of several pillars and morale couldn't be any higher. Clack. Clack. Hues of all colors flashed across the sky as the land crumbled and blood spilled in the air. Leading the charge were Brutus, Gervas and Monica, who left nothing but devastation in their wake. Show. Arg. It's the harbinger of rain. The harbinger of rain. Kill her. If there was one individual that left the greatest impact within the battlefield, it was none other than Amanda. She wasn't as strong as Gervas, Brutus and Monica, but her every actions were met with nothing but fear. Her arrows rained down from the sky like a storm, killing hundreds of demons at once. Her pinpoint accuracy and power left the demons in despair, and thus a nickname was created after her. The Harbinger of Rain. A nickname that perfectly suited her style. The Bringer of Rain. Show. Arg. Uck. S. Stop her. More and more arrows continued to rain down from the sky, killing many of the weaker demons ahead. Many demons tried to attack her directly, but it was a futile effort on their end. Silly, you've chosen the wrong target. You're supposed to kill the one next to you. Ah, yes, I apologize. Spurt. Arg. Traitor. Scenes in which demons turned against their comrades started to appear within the area around Amanda as a purplish hue swept the surrounding. The source originated from Donna, whose eyes glowed brightly, and her sweet voice traveled across the surroundings. Careful of the one behind you. He's trying to backstab you. Ah. How dare you? Dabu, thwa. Spurt. You think you could get me, you shitty traitor? Boom. Donna wasn't the only one near Amanda. Pressing his foot against the ground, black threads burst from the point where the foot pressed, and shot in every direction, impaling all the demons around. Spurt. Spurt. Black blood rained down from the sky, and Jin's figure blended against the ground, reappearing on the other side of the field, dagger in hand, and aimed at one of the many demons around them. Arg. Spurt. Removing his dagger away from the demon's back, Jin looked around him and frowned. There's too many, we need more backup. While he and Donna were doing a good job, they were still massively disadvantaged. They were only two people, and while their individual power was extremely strong, their stamina and mana wasn't infinite. At the moment they were really struggling. Show. The same went for Amanda, who didn't even have the time to wipe off the sweat that had accumulated on the side of her face. Stretching the bowstring, she released arrow after arrow. She was like a machine, and despite the blood that was leaking from her finger, she continued to shoot. But just like Jean and Donna, her stamina and mana wasn't infinite. She needed breathing space, and potions weren't going to cut out for her. This can't go on. Understanding just how precarious her situation was, Amanda was about to resort to one of the trump card when all of a sudden, boom. Amanda. You're safe. A thrilled voice echoed across the space as two people came rushing in Amanda's direction, killing all of the demons that were in their way. When Amanda turned her head, her expression also brightened. Mom, Dad. Despite seeing her parents, she was still able to keep herself relatively calm. The same couldn't be said for them as they pounced her immediately. You're safe, thank God. I didn't know what had happened, I just found myself in this weird world with your mom. I panicked when I saw you, thinking that something... Thankfully you're safe. Of course, the one that was the most worried was her dad, who embraced her tightly. So tightly that she struggled to breathe, but thankfully he didn't hug her for very long. Letting go, Edward looked around before asking, "Where is Ree?" Rumble. Rumble. Not even halfway through his sentence, and a muffled explosion reverberated from the distance. The sound came from quite far, but they were still able to hear it, and soon they witnessed one of the pillars crumble in the distance. Is that him? The subtle pain in her dad's voice was almost comical, but Amanda didn't have much time to pay attention to it as she once again stretched her string and shot her arrows. Show. Yes. She still had time to reply to them as she shot arrow after arrow. I see. Nodding his head, Edward turned his attention toward the demons and monsters around them. Stretching his shoulder, he clapped his hand once. Boom. A large shockwave spread across his surroundings, sending some of the demons recoiling back. Extending his hand, a large spear appeared in his hand, and the world around them started to dye in a crimson color. Let me help out. Stretching his back, he clenched the spear tightly. You might not know this, but there was a time I was called the Blood Prince. Arching his back, he threw the spear with all his might. Boom. A sound akin to a bomb exploding echoed out loud, and the spear shot forward at neck-breaking speeds, tearing everything in its path apart. Black blood rained down on the sky, and the air around Edward twisted. Extending his hand, a brand new spear appeared, and he once again stretched his back. Let's see. His gaze swept across the field and settled over the nearest demons. He repeated the same motion as before, and the sound of an explosion echoed in the air. Boom. Over 100 demons disappeared at that point, and a new spear once again appeared in his grasp. He grinned. Looks like I'm not as rusty as I thought I was. Chapter 843. Until my body breaks. 1. Why are you still struggling? A soft voice echoed, and a fist appeared before Ren. Cocking his head, he just barely dodged the fist and pressed his finger against Jezebeth's abdomen. It only touched him, but the moment it did so, it sent Jezebeth hurling back and plummeting against the sea beneath. Splash. Calmness returned to the world, and Ren looked around him. He was in the middle of the ocean, and the sun hung in the cloudless blue sky. He could feel the sunlight gently envelope his body and bathe it in a warm light. He could smell a rather stale, sulfurous smell coming from the sea. Such vivid sensation made him wonder if he was back on Earth or if this was a separate space. The answer was very hard to find. He couldn't quite tell anymore. Everything just seemed so realistic, and if not for the fact that he couldn't see any pillars near him, he'd be inclined to believe that he was back on Earth. Have you seen enough? A soft voice whispered behind him, and Ren turned his head. There he saw Jezebeth standing not far from him, his gaze focused on a small projection that appeared before him. His expression was anything but good at the moment. You really... As a matter of fact, it was getting worse with each second that he spent staring at the projection, and tearing his gaze away from it, he looked at Ren while sweeping his hand through the air. His gaze was a mix of complicated emotions. Didn't hold back, huh? What do you mean? Don't pretend like you don't understand. Frowning, Jezebeth clenched his fist. The water beneath him broke apart, and a significant wave rose high into the air. I bet. Everything that has happened to him is not a coincidence. The death of your dad was on purpose. It was, wasn't it? The water that was surrounding Jezebeth began to wriggle and move around his body as if it were a serpent with its own independent will. A strange power fluctuated inside of the water, and Ren couldn't help but look at it. At the same time, his mouth parted open and he spoke. What makes you think that I would purposely kill my own father? What reason would I have for doing that? Isn't it obvious? Swiping his hand, hundreds of projections appeared in the air. Jezebeth pointed at them. From the moment your father died, he no longer seemed to care about himself or those around him. He's been going on a rampage ever since, and even now, as broken as his body is, he's still trying to kill the last two. It's as if in his mind the only thing that matters is their death. Jezebeth had to pause mid-sentence and tear his gaze away from the projections. He didn't particularly feel happy, realizing that only 2 of his 7 patriarchs were alive. In fact, the realization hit him more than he had anticipated as his fist slowly came to a close. One simple breath was all that was necessary for him to rid himself of any of the unfavorable emotions that he was experiencing. Raising his head, his face turned expressionless, and the very air around him started to change to a more tranquil one. While he indeed felt sad at the thought of his comrades dying, he was quick to cut such emotions off and regain control of his mind. He was sure of it this time. Everything that had happened was within Ren's anticipation. You are the type of person who would stoop to anything to achieve his goal. I'm sure what's happening to him is all part of your intricate plan. From the very moment that the fight between the 2 of them started, Jezebeth had this unsettling feeling wash over him. He thought he had gotten an idea before, but the more he watched, the more confused he became. Just what was he planning? What was he waiting for? I'm still surprised at the fact that you're willing to drive your other self to this point in order to achieve your goals. But looking at you, I can see that you don't particularly care about what happens to him. Whenever he displayed the projections for the two of them to see, Rin never showed any care or concern for what was happening in the other pillars. It was as if he was waiting for something. And when Jezebeth watched again and saw the current state of Ren's other self, he couldn't help but think that. It's as if you're driving him to his death, no? Jezebeth corrected himself. You are driving him to his death, aren't you? The eyes of the two met at that moment, and Ren's expression remained unchanged. Jezebeth continued. You were aware from the very beginning that his mindset was still not quite there yet. And in order to perfect it, you chose to sacrifice one of the people he was close with. I don't know how, but I have a feeling that his death was something you planned. It had to be. It's something you did in order to make his goal clearer and rid of all the unnecessary thoughts that were clouding his mind. The more he thought about it, the more Jezebeth felt that he was right. Rin, the other version of him. He was someone who tended to overcomplicate things. If the incident with his father hadn't happened, it's likely that he would have started fighting against one of the patriarchs after getting a better idea of their power and attempting to stabilize the situation over the entirety of the world within the pillar. Such method was indeed good, but it consumed a lot of time which they didn't have. What surprised Jezebeth the most, however, was the fact that Rin could absorb the laws that he had given to his subordinates. The one that belonged to the protectors, and it was at that moment that everything clicked in his mind. It's clear that you knew that it was impossible for him to kill all of the 7 patriarchs unless he was this way. Your goal is to absorb everything that he managed to collect? You drove him into a corner so that he'd reach this point, and that's enough. Rin spoke, cutting Jezebeth off in the middle of his sentence. With his gaze fixed on him, Rin quietly stared at him for a good couple of seconds and eventually nodded his head. What are you nodding for? Are my words correct? Partially. Rin didn't deny it. Indeed, some of the things that Jezebeth had pointed out were indeed true. That being said, not all of them were true, and he didn't bother correcting him. There was no point in correcting him. I figured you'd come to this conclusion after a while. I'm a bit disappointed that you figured it out a bit later than I thought you would, but you didn't let me down in the end. Haha. Jezebeth laughed lightly. That attitude of yours used to piss me off a lot in the past. Funny thing is, it still does. That's a pity. Indeed. With a light smile, Jezebeth raised his hand and pointed at Ren. After that, the water snake that had been winding itself around his body suddenly twisted and launched itself in Ren's direction at an incredible rate of speed. Staring at the incoming attack, Ren extended his hand and prepared to defend against it. But just as he had started to channel his mana, the space around him cracked. Crack. 4 identical cracks appeared on his right and left sides. Plague. Chains burst out of the cracks and immediately clamped against his wrist, completely incapacitating him. Because of how quickly everything transpired, Rin did not even have enough time to react. However, even if he had, he still would not have been able to easily shatter the chains as he could see the laws that were imbued in them. Boom. As the water serpent slammed into his chest, his figure was catapulted into the water below. Flush. His vision was clouded with bubbles, and just as his back touched the ocean floor, a hand grabbed him around the neck. It glowed in white, and the chains that were binding his body tightened all of a sudden. Pain coursed through every part of Ren's body as they pulled at his limbs from all sides. Despite that, there was not much of a change in Ren's expression. Such pain was trivial to him. Let alone losing his arms and legs, he wouldn't have even cared if his entire body was burned to a crisp. Still holding on, Arg. Rin took a bite out of Jezebeth's hand, and as he did so, a sweet flavor that seemed vaguely familiar entered his mouth. I guess I can learn a thing or two from him. Thinking of how his other self had dealt with the Prince of Envy, Rin imitated him and bit into Jezebeth's hand. He was doubtful at first, but it seemed to work out better than he had imagined. Crunch. He could feel Jezebeth's bones shattering upon closing his mouth, and by channeling the laws inside of his body, he was able to somewhat loosen the chains that were binding his body. Bang! Rin was finally able to move his body in the appropriate manner, and he punched Jezebeth in the stomach area. This was despite the fact that the chains were still clamped on his body. Unfortunately, his attack was blocked by Jezebeth, who raised his knee and counterattacked with a fist of his own. Boom! The attack landed directly on Ren's face, and his body was sent crashing down to the ocean floor, where it collided with a glass film that shattered when he touched it. Crash. At this point, the environment around Ren underwent yet another transformation. Bang. Crashing against the ground, Ren felt almost all of his bones break and he lay on the ground unable to move. The chains clamping on him tightened once more, making it impossible for him to move. When he looked up, his gaze paused on the azure blue sky and sun that hung above. On the side of his vision he could see towering buildings, and when he looked around he realized he was in the middle of a city. Yet again the scenery had changed. Chapter 844. Until my body breaks. Ren lay on the ground, his body bruised and battered, unable to move. He felt weak, and with the chains sucking the mana out of his breath came in ragged gasps. Then a soft voice echoed throughout, piercing through the haze of pain. "You're strong, Ren, but you've gravely miscalculated the amount of time it would take for him to gather toward all 7 pillars." The voice said, and he strained to listen, turning his head towards the source. There, standing before the sun, was a figure that cast a brilliant glow. Ren squinted against the blinding light, trying to make out Jezebeth's figure that was hidden behind the glowing light of the sun. He looked powerful at this moment. More powerful than he had ever seen him in the past. Like. Ren strained with every last ounce of his strength, extending his hand towards Jezebeth and tearing at the chains in his way. As he covered his figure with his hand, his vision darkened and he no longer needed to squint. Simultaneously, he sensed an immense power gathering above him, the air trembling with its intensity. Ren was prepared for it. He gazed at the chains binding him, briefly closing his eyes, and then slowly clenched his hand. Chains. He wasn't unfamiliar with them. He had been bound by them for a very long time, especially ones that had been imbued with the laws. They were like an extension of his body by this point, and they didn't bother him very much. When he opened his eyes again, sunlight filtered through his fingers as his extended hand, which was aimed above his face, came to a close. Crack. With a resounding crack, the space around Jezebeth shattered like a broken mirror, revealing his figure frozen and standing behind the fractured barrier. "If someone has miscalculated, it's you, Jezebeth," Ren muttered in a low tone, his eyes fixed on the chains still clinging to his hand. He clenched both fists, and the chains disintegrated into tiny particles, followed by the chains that bound his feet. Ren reached for a potion, slowly rising to his feet and patting down his clothes. As I said before. His vision suddenly blurred, and he reappeared in front of Jezebeth, who was trapped behind the shattered glass, seemingly frozen. "You only got a fraction of your deductions correct." Ren pressed his hand forward, shattering the space around Jezebeth, and his figure vanished into nothingness. Crash. What followed was utter and complete silence as a gentle breeze blew past, scattering Ren's hair slightly. Ren stood motionless, staring at the spot where Jezebeth used to be before suddenly bringing his hand over to his mouth. PFTT. A dark red substance filtered past the narrow gaps of his fingers as his face became incomparably pale. Although his expression had no change, his entire figure was trembling. Clearly, what he had just done had taken a huge toll on his body. A testament to this was the fact that he soon felt his body plummet to the streets beneath, crashing down on them and breaking a few cars along the way. Bang. Itchy. Breathing heavily, Ren stared at the distant sun with a blank look. Almost every fiber of his muscles was torn, and his bones were on the verge of breaking apart. The extent of his injuries was so severe that Ren didn't even bother taking out a potion to heal himself. He knew that it'd be of no use to him. I guess this is the extent of this body. On any normal occasion he would have been able to last a lot longer. In fact, he would have perhaps even been able to beat him, but the current situation was different. He wasn't at his full strength. The other him was still lurking around the pillars, collecting the remnants of the protectors, and fighting against the 7 demon heads. In order to ensure that he could fight against them, Ren had to restrict the amount of mana he could use. It put him at a severe disadvantage and made things a lot more difficult for him. But that was fine. This was the path that he had chosen. Ha! Taking another deep breath, Ren stared at the sky and closed his eyes. For now, all he could do was wait. He had done enough. Crash. The space around him collapsed. Whoom. Coming out of the dimensional space, Ryan stumbled a couple of steps forward until he fell to his knees. Feeling the hard ground beneath, he looked up at the sky and stared at the distant sun. The blue sky. It was a familiar sight. When he looked around him and saw the crumbled buildings, his eyes started to clear up. Finally, we're back. His emotions were complicated at the moment. He wasn't sure how to feel. He was partly glad that he was back, but as the images of what had happened before continued to flash in his mind, he found himself struggling to keep himself composed as his hands slowly came to a close. Damn it. If only he was more talented in combat instead of intellect. He was so close to him, and yet all he could do was watch as he died right before his eyes. He couldn't even do a thing. The same was for Small Snake. If only. Now's not the time. Taking one big breath, Ryan forced himself to calm down. He was no longer a teenager. He could no longer dwell on such matters as he did in the past. He had to keep himself focused on the goal at hand. Morning came later. Rumble. Rumble. Hearing the muffled rumbling coming from the distance, he was reminded of what he needed to do, and he quickly sobered up. Nothing's changed. The only thing that changed was the location of where the war was taking place. I need to get into contact with the others. Taking out his phone, Ryan was just about to send a message to the others and verify who was there, when all of a sudden he stopped. Whoom. Thump. Thump. Overhearing two thumps from behind, Ryan turned his head to see Emma appear from the dimensional crack. She had awakened not too long after the pillar had collapsed, and despite his offer to assist her, she had declined his help. Next to her was Leopold's body. Help me. Emma tiredly called out for him as she heavily gulped for air, her face extremely pale. Yes. Helping himself up, Ryan moved toward Emma and offered her a couple of potions. Drink these, it should help you heal up. Handing over the potions, he didn't even bother looking at Emma. She was lying next to Leopold's body, and he didn't want to be reminded of his failure. Not again. Don't you have any more? I didn't give you enough? Frowning, Ryan finally looked at Emma. At a glance, she seemed to have recovered somewhat, and she still had several potions at hand. It doesn't look like you need any, so Not me, idiot. Emma cut, pointing at Leopold. Him. Pillar of Gluttony. This can't be happening. Han Yufei was known for his unwavering composure in even the most tumultuous of situations. He had faced numerous challenges and crises throughout his life, but none of them had ever faced him quite like the scene that played out before him at this very moment. As he gazed into the distance, his heart pounded in his chest and his palms grew sweaty, betraying the control he had so carefully cultivated over the years. He's absolutely insane. Han Yufei muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of explosions that echoed through the air. He's lost his mind. Despite his attempts to remain calm, Han Yufei found himself caught in the grip of an overwhelming sense of dread. His eyes were fixed on the distant figures engaged in combat, their movements blurred by the sheer intensity of their struggle. As he strained to see through the haze of dust and smoke, Han Yufei's gaze fell upon the Pillar Master of Gluttony, a fearsome demoness whose immense power sent shockwaves rippling through the earth itself. Boom. Boom. Despite her plump and seemingly innocuous appearance, there was no mistaking the lethal force that radiated from her being. As she unleashed a barrage of devastating attacks, the very land beneath her feet trembled and cracked, unable to withstand the full force of her fury. Rumble. Rumble. Han Yufei could see the devastation wrought by her power. The shattered remains of the land and trees were strewn about like so much debris. For a moment Han Yufei felt a pang of despair. How could anyone hope to stand against such a force? And yet, at the very moment two such figures were fighting against her. They were none other than Malin, the Elven Queen, and Liam. What the fuck is he doing? The realization hit him like a ton of bricks, and Han Yufei lost his composure. He knew Liam very well by now, and if there was something he understood, it was that he was a total maniac. At a glance, he could tell that he had chosen to deliberately challenge the Pillar Master. Even if he was weaker than her. Damn it, Liam. Boom. Uck. Another explosion shook the ground beneath his feet, sending Han Yufei stumbling backward. He struggled to maintain his balance, his mind racing with thoughts regarding Liam's safety, but when he looked up and saw several powerful demons appear nearby, He knew that he had to worry about something else. Fuck it. He cursed, throwing one last glance at Liam while taking out his broadsword. I'll cover for you just this time. Clenching onto his broadsword, his entire figure doubled in size, and his power suddenly exploded. Without wasting a single second, the ground cracked underneath his foot and he slashed with his sword once. Swoosh. Chapter 845 Until My Body Breaks. 3. Oof. Liam felt his arm go numb as something struck them. He was barely able to react in time, and he felt himself being thrown toward the ground at an alarmingly rapid rate. The speed at which he was traveling was terrifying. Boom. Just before he touched the ground, lightning crackled around him, and he was just barely able to twist his body and position himself in a way that helped him land on his feet rather than on his back. Bang. The ground began to crack beneath him and rocks began to fly past him. That was close. He thought, looking up at the bulky figure that the pillar mater of the House of Gluttony was. After only a few encounters with her, he realized that he was no match for her. Without a doubt, she was one of the most powerful individuals he had ever faced. Even so, bringing his hand toward his shirt, Liam clenched it and felt the beat of his heart. Bah, thump, bah, thump. It was beating wildly. Cracka, cracka. As lightning exploded all around him, he could feel excitement coursing through his entire body, and his grip on his sword became increasingly firm. Boom. Another explosion went off above him, and the Elven Queen suddenly materialized directly above the Pillar Master. She had a complicated magic circle materialize on the top of her palm at the same time. It glowed a green hue. The surroundings started to twist and long and thick vines erupted out of the magic circle, flooding the surroundings. The momentum carried all the way toward Princess Ediphagia, who gazed at it with a serious expression. She too couldn't take it lightly. The attack was strong and even Liam felt troubled by it. But just as he thought the attack would land, Princess Ediphagia suddenly opened her mouth. Whoom. As if there were a powerful vacuum inside of her mouth, the vines abruptly changed their direction and headed directly for her mouth as she swallowed them all at once. The scene left Liam stunned. The sight. It most definitely wasn't the most pleasing to look at. He was only able to concentrate on the scene for a short period of time before he became aware that the power that emanated from the princess's body was beginning to increase. Not bad. The princess muttered, her gaze turning toward Liam. Not good. Kraka. Pra. Immediately, Liam's expression changed as the lightning around him crackled even more fiercely, and he took 2 steps to the side. Boom. He had just moved when all of a sudden the area where he had been standing exploded into smithereens, leaving nothing behind. Cold sweat trickled down Liam's face as he gazed in the direction of where he previously stood before looking up at the princess, who was looking back at him with cold eyes. You were able to dodge that? Her voice, though soft, echoed powerfully in Liam's ear. Upon hearing her voice, Liam's expression changed and he pressed his hand against his sword, ready to attack. Wait. A figure suddenly materialized beside him and put her hand on his shoulder just as he was about to make a move. It was Malin. Don't attack. Because of his eyes, Liam was aware in advance who it was that had arrived beside him, and as a result he was not surprised by her sudden appearance. Turning his head he asked, "Why?" "Because you're not strong enough." When the Elven Queen extended her hand in front of her, a magical circle materialized once more. This time it was a lot more complicated than the previous one, and the power that gathered toward it was immense. Unsurprisingly, the princess maintained her position in the air, where she was, and opened her mouth as if she were waiting for the oncoming assault. Such a reaction didn't go unnoticed by Liam. "What are you doing? Haven't you noticed that she can absorb your energy?" Liam pointed out while looking at Malin with a strange expression. It should have been obvious from the first time Princess Ediphagia did it, so why was she doing it again? Did she really think that a more powerful attack was going to make a difference? I know. Thankfully, it didn't seem like Malin was unaware of this. Then, I'm just buying time. For you. She answered as if it were the most obvious. Huh. Liam was taken aback by her words and he looked at her with an even stranger gaze. She explained further. You'll only be a hindrance if you're here. I'll attack her and you can take that chance to leave. I'll buy you as much time as possible so the moment I attack you go. Oh. Liam nodded his head, completely misinterpreting her words. So she wants me to leave and attack her from up front. Thankfully she's not stupid. I see. It's good that you understand. Misunderstanding Liam's nods, Malin smiled, and the magic circle before her burst with power and headed directly for the demoness who was still hovering in the air above. Princess Adiphagia, upon realizing that the attack was headed in her direction, opened her mouth, and the attack ended up landing directly in her mouth, inflating her body. Go! Immediately after she attacked, Malin pushed Liam from the back and lightning started to crackle around him. His figure blurred on the spot and disappeared completely. He was so fast that even Malin was unable to tell where he had gone. When she managed to spot him again, her expression changed dramatically. This bastard! Appearing right behind the demoness, Liam thrust his sword at her. The space around the sword cracked and twisted, and a powerful hue suddenly burst forth from the sword. The power of that attack was unlike any he had ever thrown, and the princess, who was halfway through digesting the force of Malin's attack, could only turn her body to dodge the attack. Spurt. Unfortunately, Liam's sword was still able to land on her body, and a large gash appeared on the side of her abdomen. Black blood leaked down and the princess's expression twisted. Not that Liam cared, as lightning crackled around him, and he appeared right behind her, sword thrust directly at her left side. Her core is in her left armpit. He telepathically said to Malin while thrusting his sword at her armpit. He wasn't as lucky as before. Unfortunately for him, the moment he appeared behind her, the very air around him started to twist, and his sword bent to the side and his attack completely missed the princess's body. I missed. As soon as it became clear that his attack was going to miss, the demoness turned around and reached out with her hand to grab hold of his neck. Thankfully, Liam was able to react in time and dodge her large hand, but he wasn't lucky enough to dodge her leg, which hit him directly by the side of his abdomen. Bang! Uck! He fell back a few paces, but before he even had a chance to catch his breath, as if something were sucking him in, he felt his body move, and before he knew it, he was standing in front of the princess once more. Ah shit! Seeing her approaching hand, Liam inwardly cursed. Even so, he wasn't necessarily panicking. Exactly when her hand was about to reach for his throat, Malin appeared right behind her, with a magic circle already formed. The power contained within that magic circle was nothing to laugh at, as the entire space trembled, and even the princess was unable to ignore it as her attention shifted away from Liam. Smack! When Liam tried to knock the princess' hand away, he found that his entire body was being flung back, and he ended up crashing into the ground below. Bang! Uck! It was painful, but he didn't sustain any serious injuries. What caught his attention was a large shadow cast over the area he was in, and when he looked up, he was shocked to see the princess's figure. She was big before, but now, thump! The land quaked at her step as her figure towered over it. She was so big that Malin, who stood in the sky, looked like an insignificant bug. Rumble! Rumble! The world within the pillar quaked at her presence, and an enormous power erupted from out of the princess's body. It enveloped the entire land before gathering back toward her. With her eyes trained on the elven queen, she extended her large and bulky hand and flicked at Malin, who was just barely able to dodge. Boom! The force of that one flick was enough to generate a pressurized wind streak that tore through the air and destroyed everything that was in its line of sight. Oh, shit! The sight made Liam tremble. Not out of fear but out of pure excitement, as he hastily stood up and smacked his foot against the ground. Oi oi! Don't forget that I'm still here. Shouting at the top of his lungs, he appeared right before the princess and aimed his sword at her eye. He was fast. Extremely so, and by the time the princess found him, he was already before her eye. Unfortunately, she was able to close her eye in time, and Liam's blade was knocked back. He fell onto the bridge of her nose. Ah shit! Maybe it wasn't the best idea to shout. Realizing the predicament he was in, Liam cursed, and a large shadow cast over the area he was in. Scratching the back of his head, Liam watched as a large hand came right at him. The speed wasn't anything he couldn't deal with, but a strange suction-like force bounded him where he was, and all he could do was stare at the incoming hand that was approaching him. Well fuck. Realizing that he couldn't dodge, Liam sighed and sat down cross-legged. Maybe I should have gone for the Smack. Chapter 846 Until my body breaks. Oh, shit. Malin's eyes widened the moment she witnessed the hand come down to crush the human's body. Although she didn't want to believe it, Malin knew that it was impossible for the human to dodge the attack, and in the last moment she saw him give up and sit down cross-legged on the bridge of the princess's nose. As if swatting a bug, the princess's large hand came smacking down against her face. Smack. Shockwaves spread across the land as a result of that smack, sending all the nearby people scattering into the distance, Malin included, as her body flung into the air several times. When she stabilized herself, a curse slipped from her mouth. Shit. Damn it. Damn it, I had already warned him beforehand that this was dangerous. Why did he have to go ahead and kill himself like that? Malin was understandably angry at the situation. It was never easy to see such a talented individual die, and the fact that this could have all been avoided made her even angrier. What am I going to do when he comes and finds out that his comrade has died? Staring at the princess who towered over her, Malin felt helpless by the enormous power gap between the two of them, but she could only grit her teeth and channel all of the mana inside of her body. Knowing of just how wide the gap between the two of them was, Malin could only use her most powerful move. One after another, green magic circles appeared behind her. Thump, thump, thump. The land beneath started to tremble, and out of nowhere, thick vines that numbered in the hundreds sprouted out and made their way toward Malin. The speed at which the vines were moving was extremely fast, and upon reaching her, they twisted and bent around her body. Glowing with a yellow light, power started to filtrate Malin's body as her silver hair fluttered forward and runes appeared all over her body. Power that was unlike any other surface within every corner of her body. Letting go of Malin, the vines around her turned around and pointed directly at the princess, whose attention was now focused on her. What powerful energy! Princess Ediphagia muttered, her deep voice rumbling throughout the rotten land. She seemed rather impressed, perhaps even salivating at the power as she brought her arm to her mouth to wipe the saliva that leaked down from the corner of her mouth. One after another, magic circles appeared at the tips of the vines that were pointed at the princess, who once again swallowed a mouthful of saliva at the sight. A lot of energy. The sight of her thirsting after her attack made Malin frown, but she didn't let that get into her head, and within the span of half a second, the energy that had gathered at the tip of the vines burst forth and covered the entire land in green. Grass and flowers germinated all over the land, and the once dry world seemed to come to life for a brief moment. Malin's hair fluttered upward and she pointed her hand at the princess. Go. Her soft voice echoed throughout the land for a brief moment, and the power she had gathered burst forth and headed directly for the princess with unbelievable might and momentum. The world seemed to come to a sudden stop at her attack, and even the princess seemed to be rather taken aback by the power of the attack. That's more than I thought. Despite that, she didn't seem to be scared in the least bit. In fact, she seemed even more excited as she pressed her foot forward and opened her mouth widely. A humming sound came forth from her mouth, and Malin's attack started to twist in the air before directing itself toward the princess's mouth. The attack soon reached her mouth, and when it did so, the princess was forced to take several steps back. Thump, thump. With every step that she took, the terrain beneath her began to crumble, and all of a sudden, her cheeks began to swell up to an enormous size. Her cheeks had swollen to such an extent that she resembled a hamster that had overindulged in seeds and nuts. During this time, Malin's figure gradually descended toward the ground as she struggled to maintain her breath. Her expression was completely pale and she struggled to keep herself from vomiting. She could barely formulate a single word, and when she looked in the distance, her gaze seemed to fog up out of tiredness. Despite all of this, she forced herself to look in the distance, and that was when, to her horror, she witnessed the princess slowly coming to a halt and closing her mouth as she sucked her attack in one go. Her cheeks squirmed for a couple of seconds before the power that was contained within them calmed down, and Malin's heart dropped. Impossible. She wasn't sure how to feel at that moment. It felt as though the entire world had crumbled before her very eyes, and something sweet lingered at the back of her throat. PFTT. Unable to hold back, she spat a mouthful of blood, and her already pale face paled even further. Damn. Malin felt indignant at the situation. She thought she had grown stronger over the past 5 years, strong enough to perhaps fight against one of the 7 heads of the demons. But how wrong she was. They were monsters amongst monsters. And they weren't something that the likes of her could even deal with. Cough. Cough. Coughing several times, she raised her head in resignation, but just as she thought everything was over, her expression changed. What? How? Her expression was unable to betray the utter shock she was feeling at the moment. With her gaze directed at the princess, she watched as a figure appeared right next to her open eye, and thrust his sword at it. It all happened so fast that she barely had time to process it, but she didn't need to. Moments after witnessing the scene, black blood spurted into the air as a muffled wail echoed in the air. The princess's head flayed from left to right as the figure that stood atop her eyes clung onto the bridge of her nose with dear life. The power that she was trying to suppress inside of her mouth once again became wild, and her cheeks trembled. Instantly, the situation reversed, and Myelin found herself staring at the scene in the distance with her mouth wide open. How is he still alive? That works too, I guess. Clinging on the bridge of the princess's nose, Liam found his vision blocked by his hair, which fluttered in front of him and hindered his sight. He didn't particularly mind since he didn't need his sight, but at the same time he felt that it was a pity that he couldn't see the expression that the princess was making. Oh, how sad. It was a gamble, but it paid off in the end. Just before the hand was about to smack him, he used the move that he had been trying to perfect over the course of the last 5 years. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Liam was able to directly phase through objects as if he were a ghost by vibrating every inch of his body. The move was extremely risky since just a single mistake could cost him his life, but at the same time, it worked perfectly, and he was able to pass through her hand and narrowly avoid death. Furthermore, he would have died anyway, so he didn't really have an option and just took the risk of using the move. It's good that it worked out in the end. After giving the demoness the impression that he had died, he didn't attack immediately and bode his time for the right time to attack. When he saw Malin's attack, he understood when that moment was, and he struck right when the opportunity was ripe. In the end, his gamble paid off, and the princess found herself in a rather unfavorable situation. Rumble. Rumble. The princess continued to trash around in pain as she covered her eye with her hand. Because he was right on the top of the bridge of her nose, she couldn't see him, and thus was able to avoid getting smacked again by her. Of course, he knew that he didn't have that much time left. But now what? He had pretty much exhausted all of his means, and for the first time he was unsure of what to do. He had dealt significant damage to her, and if she lost completely control of the energy in her mouth, she'd get heavily injured, but that was where the problem lay. How was he supposed to make the energy inside her mouth go crazy? What was he supposed to do next? Is this your doing? All of a sudden, a voice reached Liam's ears, and when he turned his head, he was surprised to see Rin standing next to him, completely unfazed by what was happening around them. Well, he sounded like Rin and his outline looked like Rin, but he was a bit weird. Opening his mouth, Liam tried to say something, but he eventually nodded his head and smiled. Oh hey Rin. How have you been? I guess Liam now knew what he had to do next.